Hello everybody. Before I start this week's review, there was just a little something that I wanted to say. I think a lot of us who are dedicated petrol heads are often asked why it is that we love cars so much, why we spend so much of our time and money on them, when there are certainly plenty of other things that we could do, and after all, doesn't any old car get you from A to B? It's a question I'm sure we ask of ourselves from time to time. Believe it or not, I do actually have a life outside of YouTube and cars. Not much of one, granted, but I do. And this week has, I'll admit, been rather difficult. I think it's important to say these things because when you look at people on social media, their lives will often seem like some sort of edited highlights reel where nothing can possibly go wrong and everything is a jet-set lifestyle of supercars and exotic locations all the time. Well, the truth is that's just not how it is, I think, for any of us much of the time. And this week I have had a few things going on which have been very unpleasant to deal with. I am fine, so please don't worry about me, but it's been a tough week. However, this thing has on a few occasions managed to make me really smile, kind of forget everything that's going on, and for that I absolutely love it. As you will see, this is far from a perfect car. But I just wanted to start with that little message and to say thank you to Jaguar UK for dropping this off at what seems like just the right time. The F-Pace SVR is a car that I've been looking forward to driving for a very long time. I was supposed to have reviewed it last year, but unfortunately, because of reasons, I couldn't. On paper, it does an awful lot right. It's just large enough to be actually useful and more practical in some ways than your regular or garden variety estate. Doesn't have more load capacity, but it does sit high enough, has proper all-wheel drive, and that means for this kind of time of year where we have had floods, ice and everything else, as you can well see, it's actually a car you can go places in. However, it's not quite as gargantuan as a full-fat Range Rover or an Audi SQ7, and it's quite a bit cheaper than both of those too. The natural rival for this car must surely be the Porsche Macan Turbo. This is very similar in size, although just a little bit larger. And the Macan does seem like the better value initially because it has a lower RRP. That is until you realise that Jaguar give you nearly everything as standard, whereas with the Porsche you can still option quite a bit. And once you've got that to have the same features as this, price-wise they are pretty similar. The big difference, of course, being that even the current Macan Turbo makes do with a 440 horsepower turbocharged V6, whereas this is packing a 550 horsepower 5-litre supercharged V8. That power plant is paired to the familiar 8-speed ZF automatic gearbox. The Porsche, I'm sure, has the slightly superior transmission in their 7-speed PDK. But the Jag isn't a bad looker either, is it? In fact, I think it's one of the sexiest SUVs on sale today. It shares its underpinnings with the Range Rover Velar, which is both good and bad, as we'll find out later. But I've got to say, purely on the showroom appeal basis, the Jaguar is the one I would always go with. The right amount of aggression, curves and creases, these little vents in the bonnet, which mercifully are functional, make this thing stand out as something quite exciting. If you're used to Jaguar's German rivals, you will also find the interior to be a breath of fresh air. It feels reasonably high quality with plenty of leather and contrast stitching in it, and this is a standard interior. Too often recently have I got in a fairly high-end Porsche product and found they've spent thousands of pounds on the interior only to have it still look and feel fairly bland, and this is a very different place to be, and distinct enough from its Range Rover siblings. There are both good and bad things in here. The infotainment screen down here works well enough. I like that all of the HVAC controls are still physical buttons, although I prefer dials for temperature control. I think the Jaguar XE has maybe the best setup for that. Jaguar's virtual display here is just not great. Compared to what Audi use, it's pretty poor. You can do all the different modes and displays and things that you think you can with a German car, but here it's just not very slick. It's not a very nice thing to use. These buttons on the steering wheel don't feel great. You've also got these Ford-derived switches up here, which Jaguar have been using for about a decade and a half, and they really do need to be replaced. But otherwise, there's plenty to enjoy. You've got heated and cooled seats up front as standard, heated seats in the rear. In fact, one of the few options in the car is the opening panoramic sunroof up here, which really lifts the cabin and isn't expensive at just over £1,000. Generally speaking, this is a very nice place to spend some time. This press car at £78,000, including all of its options, I think represents excellent value for money. You're getting a lot of car here for what is today not actually that much cash anymore. But there are a few other things I don't quite like about it. These 22-inch wheels give the ride a little bit of harshness that it could do without. It is also a massive car. It may not be full-fat Range Rover size, but when you're driving it, it certainly feels like it. Probably because in width terms, it's actually only a couple of inches narrower. And on these roads, that is a problem. It is equipped not with carbon ceramics or anything fancy to stop it, but regular steel discs. So is this a car that you should be considering? Well, before we deliver our verdict, let's take it out on the road. I must admit, there was some initial concern for the big Jag, because at low speeds this car does exhibit a rather harsh ride. The 8-speed gearbox does seem to spend a lot of time trying to make its mind up exactly which gear it wants to be in, and manages to somehow blunt the potency of that fabulous 5-litre supercharged engine. Visibility is also something of an issue, not so much in terms of seeing out of the car, but trying to place it isn't the easiest. Because it has that more angular, aggressive, sloping front end, you can't place the corners as easily as you can in a Range Rover, which is something Range Rover, of course, are very proud of. Jaguar also made, I think, a fairly large faux pas when they sent this car out, because they have supplied it to me in January, where it's 1 degree and earlier was -1, with regular Pirelli P0s on. That means that getting traction can be somewhat tricky. This car should just be on winter tyres. I don't know how easy it is to get winters in 22-inch size, but it must be possible, and I really think Jaguar should send these cars out so equipped. Now, this car, of course, has the usual plethora of driving modes, and usually you also have an exhaust button, which doesn't seem to have a transformative effect the moment you press it, but believe me, does make a bit of a difference. There's no beating about the bush. When you get down to it, when you put this car into dynamic mode and you decide to shift gear for yourself, it is an absolute blast. The rev limit at 6,500 RPM might seem somewhat miserly, but trust me, it's more than enough. This car has plenty of punch all through the rev range and is absolutely brilliant to listen to. This thing is savagely quick. The brakes also give you pretty decent feel too. And coming off the back of a couple of disappointing German sports cars, the Cayman GTS and the 992 Carrera, there's a few things Jaguar seem to get right. The steering, well, not world class, no McLaren's going to be kept up at night worrying about it. It's really direct, it's nicely weighted, and it gives you a reasonable sense of control. When the front end does start to wash wide, and trust me, at this temperature it will, you know exactly what's going on and you know how much corrective action to take. The 8-speed ZF isn't PDK quick, but when you're pressing on, it shifts quickly enough, and around town it's very smooth, intuitive, and easy to use. It is the correct gearbox for this car. Downshifts aren't the quickest, of course they're not, but you press that paddle, which actually is better than, say, even in the R8, and it gives you that nice burble, that crackle on the overrun. It's not silly, not like the old F-Type, which had an absolutely mad exhaust. This is judged very well. Jaguar, I think, one of the few companies that have actually benefited from the new noise restrictions, because their old cars were just too much. Once you begin to press on too, that suspension starts to make a hell of a lot of sense, because it actually becomes a lot more supple, a lot softer, and it really works. It means you can cover ground in this thing at an absolutely obscene pace. The thing holding me back here really is the tyres, because they just don't have the grip that you need. In fact, I went around a mini roundabout at the local petrol station a couple of days ago and did a fairly sharp right, and the car just ploughed on. The car's curb weight of just over 2 tonnes is actually, in this class, not horrendous either. A similarly equipped Macan Turbo is going to be maybe 50 odd kilos lighter, but is still shy by over 100 horsepower. And the engine in that, while decent, doesn't trump this, no way. Of course, there are some downsides, and unsurprisingly, fuel economy is one of them, because this car's pretty thirsty. In fact, on this portion I've been averaging about 12 to the gallon, but don't take that as any sort of guide, because that's a fairly extreme one. You can expect probably about 24 to 26 as a more realistic average on longer journeys. Better, I'm sure, is possible, but I've yet to achieve it. While we're stuck in traffic, let's talk a little bit more about this interior. I like the fact that a lot of it is leather. Some of it weirdly isn't. This should really be leather, and why these switches are up here, I have absolutely no idea. I guess they expect you to sort of be doing that all the time, but actually I tend to just by default go to look down here for window switches, where you will in fact find the unlock buttons for the door and the memory seat positions. Traditionally, I also despise any sort of heated screen, because I find myself looking at the lines far too often. However, in the F-Pace, they've been genuinely useful. There's several occasions this week where I've come out to find the car totally frozen over, and with that on, it clears very quickly, even with snow on the car. These seats are good, but not great. Love the look of them, love the feel of them, and they are quite comfortable initially. They've also got plenty of adjustment, including adjustable bolsters, which is really nice. They will grip you if you want them to. But after a long journey, after a couple of hours or so, I did find myself getting just a little bit numb. These really could do with a massage function. The cooling seat function is really nice, and on a summer's day I actually use that a lot. Once you've had a car with cooled seats, you really don't want to go back, because it's a real joy. You actually have 3 different options for the roof on this car too. You could have it just regular, plain nothing up there. You could have this sliding roof, or you could have a regular fixed panoramic item, which is a little bit cheaper. Personally, I'd always go for the sliding one, and I in fact did a journey the other day where it was warm enough I could open it, and you didn't get too much buffeting in here either. The headlights in this are good, but not great. They are the regular LEDs. You can then get Jaguar's optional signature LEDs, which will do the sort of matrix light type thing. They'll go off individually. This one just has auto dip dim, and I gotta be honest, it's pretty bad at doing it actually. It may be a little harsh for the ordinary daily duties, but this is not the normal F-Pace. This is the SVR. So when you do find yourself on a road like this, where he should be the only other piece of traffic because this road is closed in about a mile, you can have a lot of fun. So that's it, right? F-Pace is brilliant. Just about big enough to be useful, decent four-wheel drive system, good steering, good brakes, hell of an engine, and it's reasonably priced in this marketplace. No reason not to buy it, right? Wrong. This is where my job gets really difficult, because I love the F-Pace SVR. It drives wonderfully, it handles great, it has one of the most characterful engines on sale today. It's a good looking car, and it's just about practical enough that I could justify it over having, say, an equivalent estate car. This is a much better thing than the Jaguar XF, as much as it pains me to say that. But it's not all been good news for the F-Pace this week. Of the very many press cars that I've had on the driveway, only 3 have ever given me enough of an issue that I felt the need to call the manufacturer. One was the Bentley Continental GT, which started misfiring. That we traced down to some bad fuel because the car had been sat around for many months, so that really wasn't the car's fault. The other two, however, were Jaguar products. The XE that I had decided one day that its infotainment and HVAC would simply not turn on, meaning I couldn't use the stereo and navigation or the heater controls in the car, and it didn't want to fix itself until I left it overnight for it to clear. And then the other day, 2 days into having this car, it would not start. In fact, I initially thought it was simply a problem with the tailgate because Land Rover products are notorious for having tailgates that malfunction. I opened it and it unlocked, but didn't raise. I then went to get in the car to find that all of the displays were completely dead and the car absolutely refused to start or even turn the ignition on. We had to call the AA out on it, who looked all over it, couldn't find any issues with it, and then it decided to start. I can only assume that this must have been a fuse or a relay or something that had blown when I opened the car and then reset itself about an hour later. But when you're looking at a car like this, this is going to be somebody's daily driver. You're going to want to rely on it, aren't you? You don't want to have that question about whether it's going to start in the morning. And this is where this car sharing its underpinnings with the Range Rover Velar have been something of its undoing, because I've known quite a few people that went and bought that car, and I'll be honest, I still don't really even understand what the Velar is, but they have had many problems with it. In fact, I'd say it's one of the most problematic cars of the sort of recent years that I've known about. And to have this then sort of break on me while I had it for test is difficult. I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't count that against it. And so for that reason, should you buy an F-Pace SVR? Yes, but get yourself a 15-year-old Ford Focus to go alongside it, because you'll probably be able to pinch some bits from it if ever you need them, and you will probably want something to be able to use on the day the Jag breaks. I think this car is probably going to give you more grief and more jip than any Porsche you might buy, but I do promise you that when it comes back from being worked on, take it out for a drive and you will forgive it. That's all from me. Thanks for watching. Please like, comment below, subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you on the next one. Bye-bye.